Hazard may have a couple of abilities that are reminiscent of other characters, but I think his playstyle is pretty unique, and I wanted to talk about how I think he is going to fit into the meta. What his general playstyle is going to be, what some of his better maps are going to be, and also some of the better compositions and characters that he's going to work pretty well with. So while we're in the practice range here, I want to start off with his general playstyle. So they describe him as kind of like a dive brawl hybrid, and I think that is a little misleading because when I think of dive, I think of characters that or comps that kind of have moments of really big value and really big kill threat. You know, when a Winston or a Ball or a Doomfist or even a Diva dive in with their team, they come in and swarm and get a lot of like high burst damage. Now, this guy, Hazard, is definitely capable of that, but in general, I think his playstyle is more sustainy. It's more less higher peaks of kill threat and more consistent value and uptime, right? He's going to be more of a nuisance, more of a resource puller, and is going to be able to sustain himself for a while. And so that's where kind of like those brawl comparisons come in, as well as he's got really good cleave. He's got a really nice disruption as well with multiple knockbacks. But I also don't think he quite plays the brawl play style as well as any particular brawl character either. So when they say he's a brawl dive hybrid, I don't think it's that he is, you know, you play either him in dive or in brawl. I think it's more of you play him in areas where dive and brawl are both viable or both pretty good options. Then he really has a lot of room to work with. Otherwise, if you play him purely dive or purely brawl, I think you're missing out on a lot of opportunities, and it's just more of like, why not play another tank that can do this playstyle more? So his playstyle, he has a lot of different options, but I don't think he's typically the best in any of the regular ways that we see the game. So in that case, I think he actually, although he is very versatile, I think he's a little more limited in the compositions that he can play, especially more in like the higher level organized settings. I think he's going to find himself not slotting into a lot of places. He's going to be a lot more map specific, a lot more counter comp specific as well. At least that's what I think. So you would play him, you know, I think the best comparison I can think of is closer to Doom and Wrecking Ball. Doom in particular, he feels like a lot more counter brawl, where Doom is like pretty good into really clumped up shield tanks. Like, you know, I think he does pretty well into Rhine comps and a lot of like more sustainier versions of those comps. I think Hazard plays pretty well into those faster, less like team oriented comps, like Junker Queens or maybe like Maugas, less so Orisa. But the reason being is that if you didn't know, that is blocked by shields, which is a really, really major distinction to be made, because he's going to have a lot of trouble getting around Rhine comps, and also that is also blocked by shield. So around like a Reinhardt or even like a Ramatra or something, he's going to have a lot of trouble actually getting that cleave value. So you're going to be losing out on a lot of damage trying to get these characters. And of course, if you're trying to disrupt with your, what's it called? You're trying to disrupt with the wall itself, it's going to be hard to get that wall around traditional brawl comps. Like, there you go. You actually didn't get it in the core. You didn't disrupt them together. They're still going to be stacked together. Although, you know, if you're going against a queen per se or something like that, that's going to be way easier. You're going to have nothing that's really stopping that value, that disruption of the brawl. So I think he is kind of like the other version, like he's a lot better into other types of brawls, the ones that are a little like less super stacked together and playing around their shield or their tank, and the ones that are a little more open. I think he can disrupt them a lot better. You also could play what I call like the slower dive style, almost like dive poke hybrid. I think this style is best shown off in some of like older D.Va comps where, here, I'll show you, right? So what D.Va would do is that you would play a backline like Bap, Kiri, and you play like a sniper and then maybe like a tracer. So you've kind of got pokier, slower, but also like still still like dive potential. D.Va kind of just plays like, I'm gonna go up to this high ground, make sure it's clear, blah blah blah. My Bap is going to do the most healing for me, and then I'll go to the next high ground, make sure that's clear. My tracer's gonna be there. If we see a dive or something, that's when we 3, 2, 1, and then we don't commit as hard, right? Kiriko kind of goes with the tracer, goes with the D.Va, helps do more damage, and makes those angles with the DPS more secure while Bap gets the D.Va. And you just kind of like play like that. You can play that on defense and play more formidable, or you could just play a very slow next high ground, next corner, and do that. I think he's going to slot into that pretty well. He is not as fast as the other dive tanks like D.Va. D.Va's a little slow, a little linear, so, he'll just jump up to a high ground. He's got good close range pressure. He's got really good kill threat on characters as well, so if a squishy is up there, you're not going to want to take this duel most of the time. And then once that is done, you go to the next one and you make sure, and you check, you check down there, you've got decent poke from higher ranges, also like D.Va as well. I think that is also going to be a pretty good play style for him as well. So with that, I think, let me see if I got anything else here. You're not going to be standing in front of the tank, I think, is the main thing. You're not going to be dueling the tank, trying to trade with the tank. His damage against them is honestly pretty poor. He doesn't do a lot of damage in that regard, so just kind of face tanking a tank, they are going to out sustain your damage really hard. So you want to get on squishies, you want to disrupt the tank, get around the tank. If you're not able to do that, I don't think you should be playing this character most of the time, right? So that's why I think he, we'll talk about specific characters that he's not going to be good into a little later. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking kind of in that regard. Actually, I think let's go into characters right now. So in general, I think he's going to play well with the dive characters and some of the slower ranged characters, especially characters that can do both of those things, I think are going to be the best with him. I don't think he's incredibly good with super frontline characters that much. And I also think he's going to suffer against a lot of shield tanks, and basically a lot of tanks in general. It's gonna really matter more about how he can avoid them, how effectively he can avoid the tank. But yeah, we'll get into all that. So in terms of characters that I think he's good with, obviously we'll ignore the tanks for right now. But in general, I think his backline is going to want to not necessarily play with him all the time. I think the best type of backline is one that can support him and enable him from afar. So your Anas and your Junos, right? Juno speed rank helps him get in. I think that's one of his bigger weaknesses as a dive tank. Juno definitely helping out a lot. Ana, of course, definitely dive, slower variant as well. You pair Juno and Ana with a Brig, of course, that is going to be, I think, the most formidable backline for him. I don't think he's an all-in type of dive character like a Doomfist, like I said earlier. So I don't think like a Lucio Kiri backline is going to work as well, like a Lucio Moira or something. Maybe even like, like a Zen variant where you kind of like play, for Discord. I don't think he is going to work nearly as effectively with those compared to like a Doomfist or a Wrecking Ball. So I would definitely prefer like Ana, Juno, Brig backline as like the default. If you're playing very slow, you're playing very defensive on certain maps, I think you can totally get away with a Baptiste as your most, the character that's going to help you, because he does help sustain a lot better than some of those characters with Lamp and his burst healing. So if you really want to play super slow, super like just high uptime, just create the wall, I think Bap's going to help a lot. And I talked about it earlier, but like a Kiriko as well. could really help with, the diving potential of this character in that regard. So I think on standard, you're going to play like Ana, Juno, and then with a Brig backline. And then in some regards, you can play a BAP with him. I would say less spam, so like no Zenyatta, no Ilyari. More so like Kiriko, right? You could even play a Moira as in the Kiriko slot, but I think Kiriko is probably much better in that regard. You could play a Lucio. That would make a little brawlier with the Baptiste in particular. That could be okay, but I don't think it is going to be nearly as efficient. He doesn't really need the speed boost in that type of playstyle on those maps, right? He could use the speed boost from Juno for other things, but I think Lucio is not quite going to help out as much as you think it might. He also doesn't really need the knockback from Lucio because he has plenty of it himself. That I think is another important thing to talk about. So he doesn't have like bad synergy with a Lucio, but I just don't think it's worth it to run a Lucio. For the supports that I think are definitely not great, I talked a little bit about like Ilyari, and like, of course, like Mercy is not great with like any tank in particular. You play her more for DPS characters. But I think the one character in this lineup that I would really not recommend with him is Lifeweaver, because if you're putting a lot of healing and resources into the tank, eventually you're going to need to like interact with him with, Life Grip, and Life Grip on on Hazard, not going to be very good. He wants to be in there. He wants to have as much uptime as possible. Removing him from the fight, making him set back up, is going to be a bit of a disaster, I think. There's going to be a lot more space gone. When he is gone from the fight, that is the time that the other team needs to go in, when his resources have finally been expended. So if you pull the plug early, that is not going to be a good factor. So maybe there's a world where Lifeweaver can work with another one of these good characters, and he never grips the tank as much as possible, and you're playing very slow. But I think in general, you probably want to avoid Lifeweaver. Going on to the DPS, I think the characters that are going to work the best with him are going to be those mobile dive characters that also can play a little slow and a little spammier. The best options, I think, there are going to be your Echo and your Genji, right? I think those are going to be like the best like flex DPS picks with him. They can spam out, they can play slower, but when he's ready to go in, they can get in and help him, right? Obviously, a Tracer is never going to be a bad idea either, just because she is who she is. So don't think like you can't play Tracer. Sombra probably could work in a very similar regard as well with the Tracer, but I just don't think she is like particularly strong right now. So, and we honestly, her playstyle is hard to pin down what she's looking for. In fact, she plays a little better into Brawl comps or with Brawl, but she's still a little divey, so she might actually work decently well with him as well. In terms of your hit scan picks with him, I think you need a little bit of mobility and help with the anti-Brawl. So that's going to be your Sojourn and your Ashe, right? Dynamite and Disruptor Shot are really good with the anti-Brawl. Mix that with his block. That's going to be a lot of cleave damage that he can follow up on, or another DPS can follow up on. They're both more mobile than like a Cass, right? So Cass, I think, is going to struggle a little bit with him, but Ashe is going to be a lot more versatile. And of course, Sojourn has her slide and everything. That can help a lot as well. She can focus on pressuring the tank. She and Ashe, of course, can both focus on pressuring the tank more. Soj can build her rail off the tank, do a lot of good damage on them, and then look for backline to help with the assassinations with Hazard. I think that is going to be a really good help, because trying to keep the tank at bay, Hazard's not going to be very good at that, so you kind of need to offset that a little bit. So I also think like maybe a Hanzo would be a decent choice. Junkrat isn't particularly strong, but isn't going to be the worst option ever. Pharah is in the same boat. I think she's probably not the best option ever, although I think the Echo is going to be more versatile overall. The characters that I wouldn't play with him are the ones that are going to be much more in the Brawl area. They're going to be much more focused and centered around that. So like Reaper, it could be okay, but in general, I think he plays a little too all in, a little too in there. Now, again, you could go for the tank. He's going to be the one that's pressuring the tank while Hazard does something else. That could be okay, but I don't think it's going to be the best ever. I would avoid your Torbjorn. I think he just plays too far back, too slow. not really what you're looking for. I would avoid your Venture and Symmetra. I think they are too close range. Not quite what you're looking for, because Venture, you know, if you're wanting to play a little brawlier, a little always closer in, it could be okay, but they don't have that range to offset it, and I think a lot of these other characters do. So Venture could be fine in certain points. Same thing with Mei, right? She could be fine in certain regards, but she also doesn't have the mobility, which is really a problem. Venture could be okay, but not mostly. I think Symmetra is probably not going to be very good. Hazard has no way to augment her or protect her in any way, and she's much more all in on the front line, so I would not play her. Bastion, very much you play for the front line. Now, he could be a good way to offset when Hazard needs to get out, and what's it called? Get out and heal. That is when you could use turret mode, but again, I think that's just too linear. That's like more delaying the inevitable more than it is actually trying to find good opportunities to dive and kill things. That I would say you're much better off with a Sojourn or an Ashe or something like that. I don't think any one DPS is probably that bad with him, although Sim's probably the worst, I would say. You could make a lot of these work, but I think like these two and these two are probably going to be like your best bet, like mix and match. One hit scan and one flex DPS, or all in on both, depending on what you're playing. So yeah, I think that's what you're looking with the characters, playing with them. Now, playing against characters, we can talk about tanks here as well. So one thing to note is that shields are very strong. I actually think Reinhardt has a very good matchup into him, because against Rein comps, you're going to be struggling a little bit, but also Rein's shield can block his ult if you look up. So you actually might be able to help save your teammates. Same thing with like Diva. Diva defense matrix can eat it, and she can eat it for her allies. If a Diva is on point, she might be able to completely deny your ult. Zarya is going to be the same way, right? But I think Zarya, you're going to be a little better into like a Zarya comp, so just be aware of that. I think he's going to be very weak against Sigma on very long range maps. Even on maps that he's good at, Sigma might give him a bit of trouble because he's got a good stun. He's got the shield to block off things. Probably not a great matchup. I think Roadhog is probably not as bad as you think it might be. Obviously, he can get hooked, but he's got plenty of mobility, the block, the sustain. I think it'll be fine. I think he's going to be pretty good into like a Junker Queen. He'll be decent into the Zarya. He'll be probably pretty good into Mauga as well, because, that actually, I don't know so much. He probably is going to suffer a little bit into Mauga now that I'm saying it. He'll be okay into Ori. You just need to play around her CDs and go more for the backline. Again, right, you're going for the backline, but how effective is the tank at disrupting that, right? I think every character on here has a way to disrupt them. I mean, like, Knife is still, like, a pretty good tool, right? Bubble is great to disrupt a lot of the damage that he's bringing in. Like, there's no tank in here that I think is he's really going to be good into, but I think there's a couple tanks that he's going to suffer against. I think he's probably not going to be very good into Winston either, just because Winston, very mobile. You can't catch him. He's going to be on your back line. You're not going to be able to do much about him being on your back line. It felt really bad in a Pugs I was playing to play into a good Winston, because it felt like I really couldn't interact with him and disrupt what he was doing. So I think Winston and Reinhardt are probably gonna, and Sigma, like those three are probably gonna be like the worst to play into. They are the extremes, right? Ryan is the brawl extreme, Sigma is the range or the poke extreme, and Winston is the dive extreme, where playing into them on their good maps is just not going to work that as well as you think it's going to. It's gonna be a bit of a struggle, at least I think. So that is kind of where I'm at with the tanks. Now, with the DPS, he is going to suffer against range in particular. So Widowmaker, Hanzo, Soj, Ashe, even Pharah, if they can keep away from him, he does kind of struggle closing the distance. So especially on long range maps and stuff, it's going to be hard to get onto these characters, and it's going to feel really difficult trying to match their range and everything. So that particularly, Torb as well. Oops, I'm on Pharah. Torb as well is going to be a bit of a problem. Be wary of, like Sombra, of course. Not only does Hack mess up your block, although you do have a little bit of defense against it if she doesn't, space it correctly. The other thing is that Virus is going to be like a pretty big tool to like stop your sustain a little bit. I say a pretty big tool. Now that I'm saying it out loud, not that much. Just CC, you got to be careful of it. I don't think Cass's mobility grenade or hinder grenade is that much of a problem, and his range is pretty close in, so he's probably not that much of an issue either. You've got a pretty good, you've got good tools to get away from like a Venture or a Reaper, so they're not going to give you that much trouble. I think it's really the characters with range that you really need to be careful of. I think he does do decently well into Bastion, just because Bastion sucks and it's easy to play around him. But in theory, it could be, I guess in theory it could be bad, but honestly not really. Supports, Ana is really hard. Not only does she play really far away, it's hard to get onto her. Sleep is really good against block. Anti-Nate is just really good against you in general. It really cuts down on the time you're allowed to be in the fight, and it's harder for him to get out of the fight compared to like a Doomfist or something. So Ana, I think it is definitely okay, like playable against. If you get antied at full health, I think you're fine. If you get antied anywhere a little less than that, around half, you're really in trouble, right? And if you get slept first before you get antied, then I think you also need to run away, right? Like, it's gonna be really tough. Juno, or let's just go Baptiste, further back, but I think you have a much better matchup into him because he doesn't really do anything to you and his mobility is pretty limited. So if you can get to him, you can put a lot of pressure and force his best CDs as well. So I think you're actually pretty good into Bap. Brig is going to, dive tank. She's going to be direct counter to you. You can play around her, but she's going to be able to get away from you with Bash. She's going to be able to whip shot you away. I think it's going to be hard, but doable. Ilyari is going to suck because what's going to happen is that you're going to try and jump at her. She's going to jump away, put you in range of her spam damage, and you're going to have to waste your block resource. So I think this is also probably pretty weak. Juno is probably whatever. You're not going to be able to catch her very often, but she is kind of squishy, and she doesn't do much to harm you. Kiri Suzu is really good against your ult, so keep that in mind, and it's going to be hard to pin her down as well. But again, less health, definitely doable, right? Lifeweaver is going to play super far away, but his mobility is also pretty limited. And you are pretty good at getting and disrupting him from his platform. So playing around that is going to be the best. If you can try and wait to jump him before the platform is out, you're probably going to get him, right? Lucio, he can knock you back and speed the team away. It's going to be kind of hard to play into Lucio, but obviously doable. Mercy, if you can catch her with Guardian Angel, it's a little more difficult than you would think. But you also can effectively knock back res a lot. That is a very good thing, especially at range. So keep that in mind. Probably fine. Moira, you can keep up with her. Your jump is on a less of a cooldown than her fade, I'm pretty sure. So you should be pretty good into Moira. And Zen is like worst matchup in the game. I say worst matchup in the game. One of the worst for Zen because he's very squishy. I don't think Snap Kick is really going to matter against this guy because he's got okay range and Zen's hurtbox is pretty big. And he has no mobility. So Discord, yes, but like once he's there blocking in your face and he can't get away from you, Zen kind of sucks, right? So I think that's kind of like where we're at. In general, I think Hazard is not the best character in the world. At least right now, maybe some messed up combo will be found or messed up strategy. But as I'm thinking right now, for a tank, tanks are supposed to be the best in the game. For a tank that cannot interact with other tanks, it's difficult, right? It's pretty difficult not to be able to even like do much to stop other tanks at all, other than a very well-placed wall, which is hard to do, right? So yeah, let's go ahead and move on to a couple of maps, right? Okay, so I've picked Throne of Anubis here because I think it really does show off the best of his vertical and like brawly potential, right? So Throne of Anubis first has a lot of random places you can kind of set up and start from. and go all the way around. And he has a couple of good escape options. He can go under and then climb right back, get right back into the fight when he's ready. Okay, if wall climb decides to work, welcome to Overwatch wall climb. But also, if he's getting pressured, he can play around this. He can jump over here. He can jump around this pillar. He can block in a lot of different ways. There's a big choke over here that you can block off entirely. You can block off heals. You can block people from escaping. You can even get a little cheeky and go up here and kind of come in from this way as well. There is so much you can do on this point, right? You can even climb over here, poke a little bit, wait, use the mega. Like, I think this is kind of the best. Like, it is a good hybrid point, right? It is brawly. There's a lot of vertical mobility that he can abuse and get rid of, to abuse more of his opponent. And I think that this is like one of the best points for him in the game, if I had to guess, right? Especially if we kind of got like the right comp behind him. Even like the second point is also very good for him, right? There's this high ground up here. You're kind of forced to duel on the point, which, you know, that's the brawly part. There's a lot of chokes that you can enable. You can knock people off the high ground with the wall as well. And really, it's kind of finicky, but you can kind of, you know, play around this thing and jump on this side. It's kind of hard to do. I was doing it the other day. But I'm pretty sure you can like, you can kind of just stay there and then kind of like play around this. It's kind of weird. You have to like not like super leap off of this thing. It's kind of hard to do, but this is actually really good because you can keep control of this high ground and still like block the LOS and like get healing and stuff. I'm a really big fan of that. Or you can just drop under, play here. It's that, right? This map is very mobile, it's very vertical, but it's still kind of brawly, right? And that, I think, is where he's really gonna play the best. So a lot of points on Oasis, like Garden, I think is one that he's gonna be pretty good on. Blizzard World second, I think, is one of those where it's like high and low, where he's got a lot of room to work. I think King's Row is probably also pretty good for him. Tight corridors with good verticality. That's really what I'm getting at, right? It's tight, small sight lines with good verticality to play against. There's a couple of other points you might be decent on, like Paradiso second. Surabasa in general has felt really good. It's one of those brawlier maps with more verticality on the points. I've really liked playing on that one. I think Numbani might be okay, especially like on a defense or something. That is also possible. So I think that this is the best of his really good maps for him. All right, so I wanted to bring up Rialto because I think this is one of those maps where in general he's not going to be very good, but there might be some particular comps that are going to work for him. So on this first point, you know, you could play this high ground and kind of play this choke, right? And just kind of hop around here, jump in, do all this, right? Block, do whatever you're doing, and then kind of jump, escape. Okay, I missed, but you know, jump, escape, come up to the high ground, get healing, and then drop back down, right? You could totally play that super defensible and kind of deny these long angles. Just basically don't play them, right? Don't play in this sight line. Make sure you've got somebody to bully this high ground, but you totally just play the choke and survive. Even if you come back here, right, you kind of play for this choke as well. You've got all this high ground to work with. You've got a couple of weird places to come from as well. I think it could totally work, but not going to be quite the best, right? You're going to have to give up a lot and make sure your team comp is really right for that. On the attack, right, this is what I was talking about with like kind of playing like those Diva Bap Kiri comps, where he starts up here, right, and he makes sure this high ground's clear, and he checks this high ground, and then he kind of waits, and he gets healed, and he goes up here, and he makes sure this high ground gets clear, because a lot of people aren't going to be able to deal with him. Now, if there's a tank up here, he's going to need a little bit more help from one of his DPS, and probably like the Kiriko, or whoever you bring with him. And then from here, right, that is when, you know, you've got like a longer range DPS to watch this, like an Ashe, I think would be really good here. And then you go here, right? And then you make sure this area is cleared out and you brawl a little bit, and then etc, etc. Now, you are playing more for distraction, you're playing for resource pull, you're looking for attention, right? And then your Ashe, or even like you could play like a Widow or a Hanzo with this, that are really looking for the kills, right? Or like you find somebody caught out, and that's when your Tracer and you and your Kiri, you know, pounce on somebody over here, you know, and kill them. That is kind of like how you would play that, although, you know, going into second, that's not going to work, right? And that's I'm transitioning here into what is bad for him, right? So this point, you're never getting through here. He's going in with 0 health. He's going to waste his block coming in. He's going to waste a lot of resources, but he can't get his supports in. He'd have to go in all alone trying to make a lot of noise. But the problem is that on like a spam map or something, he's not going to be able to deal with people over there and people over here and maybe even somebody there. He could try to, but there's always going to be somebody poking out and putting pressure on your backline as they rotate in. It's going to be really difficult. Now, I guess you could try to throw a wall up, block a sight line while they go. I don't know if that's really going to work, especially here, right? Like there's more big sight lines even down there. Like it's really hard. And on third, you lose that verticality. You could play him okay on defense here. Like you play this staircase and you kind of go up and down or whatever. But in general, I think this is a good, this point in particular shows like really bad stuff. And while we're on that part, you know, the extremely long sidelines, I think are going to be the very bad maps for him. So Circuit, Havana, Junkertown, Rialto, all of those, even like Coliseo has really long sidelines, and like stuff like that. And then we'll also talk about some of those dive maps that I don't think he's going to be very great on either. So Eichenwalde kind of proves my point for both the very, very flat maps and also the very, very vertical maps. And I'll show you why, right? So when you're trying to attack this point, not only is this a really nasty choke, yes, you can get up here pretty effectively and clear this out, but once you get further in, you're on the ground. Your boots on the ground brawling. And that is just not really going to be as good for Hazard. These chokes are much more open. The wall isn't going to be as valuable here, which is really important. And it's going to be hard to kind of check both angles and play as a team. Going up here, sure, you could clear up this high ground. But again, when you go in, that allows them to go on your team. And it's going to be really hard for him to really pull a lot of resources here on these flat maps. And keep himself alive as much. So I think this is one of those examples where this is like pretty flat. You know, something like New Junk City, I think he's going to struggle on, super duper flat, stuff like that. But then we go into Eichenwalde point 2, where now we're struggling getting through because it's too vertical, right? The dive maps like Gibraltar, or even, I think Dorado might be okay, but we'll say Dorado as well. Those very, very vertical ones are really going to be hard for him because he's gonna have to use a lot of resources. I mean, if he wants to get all the way up there, you know, I could maybe do that. I jump, I come up here, it takes a while. I have to use a lot of resources. I don't have my wall when I get up here. And again, it's gonna be hard for my team to live, right? Because that takes a long time, so they're gonna have to wait. It's a lot of time wasted while you get up here. And again, if the tank is up here, if they're spamming a little bit, you can't interact with the tank very well. You're not gonna be able to dislodge them from here. You're gonna have to go for a squishy. That's gonna be hard, right? If your team gets counter dove while they're walking in, you can't deal with that very well either, right? I think this kind of shows like the verticality here is a bit of a struggle. It's too many resources to devote, and it takes too much time to get up here. When a Winston could just jump, like it'd take that amount of time to jump from there, and get a lot more value that way. Diva could DM her team in. Wrecking Ball could disrupt people, set up differently, you know, safer compared to this guy. There's just a lot of better options. And of course, if you just try to take the regular brawl, right, like you guys come in here and you play in here, you're not that good at like a close quarters brawl as well. Maybe you can wall off this staircase, but I think your team gets run over a little more in a regular brawl versus brawl scenario. So it's a little difficult. It's really hard with this character to get around on these very vertical maps. It's okay, you can do it, but I think you're better off just playing characters that are going to be much more effective at doing that. So I guess with that, my overall first impression for fitting him into the meta is that he will be much more niche than I think he plays, or we think he plays, right? He's the jack of all trades that can't really compete, right? He wants a map that allows him to do everything, right? He wants a vertical map that's also good for his shorter sight lines, right? He doesn't want these extreme maps. He might be okay, he might be functional on them, but why play this character when you can play the ones that really excel in those areas, right? So overall, I don't think he's going to be the strongest pick ever, but there might be the right situations where you really could play him in an effective manner. That is what I think, but I want to hear back from you. What do you think? Please leave a comment down below and subscribe if you like this video. I really appreciate it. Like the video while you're at it too. I stream live twitch.tv/LaneHemming. That's Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays. I will not be live this week because it's Thanksgiving week, but next week I will be ready to talk to you all. And if you want to talk all things Overwatch, please join my Discord down below. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching. Please have a good day.